I don't think people quite understand how big of a deal this is, as George Clooney has come out to ask Joe Biden to step aside. I'm going to get to this New York Times op ed that is, I think, the biggest blow to the Biden campaign since his terrible debate performance. And I'm not just saying this because George Clooney is, a famous actor. I'm saying this because he is a well known Democratic fundraiser. In fact, last month he held or co hosted the largest fundraiser for any Democratic candidate ever. So, this headline from The Hill: Biden enlists Obama, George Clooney, Julia Roberts for star studded mega fundraiser. Here is an image from that event. And Clooney references this as well in the beginning of his op ed. So, George Clooney: I love Joe Biden, but we need a new nominee. This is what is going to move Joe Biden. It's not about the people. It's not even really about the party that much. It's about the donors. Once you lose big Democratic donors, you lose. That is what is going to force his hand, if anything is going to force his hand. Now, of course, Biden has a massive ego, as anyone that runs for president likely does. But this is so foundational to how party politics operates, where when a massive fundraiser like this comes out and somebody who is famous, well known and loved, like George Clooney, it's going to move people, not even just within the party, but also within Biden's own circle. So he starts off by referencing here his largest fundraiser ever for Joe Biden. He also says he was with Joe Biden 3 weeks ago at a fundraiser, and he was not the Joe big effing deal Biden of 2010. He wasn't even the Joe Biden of 2020. He was the same man we all witnessed at the debate. Telling people, believe what you're seeing. Do not believe what the Biden campaign or the White House is saying to defend Joe Biden. Believe what you saw at the debate. That is who Joe Biden is now. He goes on to say, we are not going to win. I think I missed a piece here. At some point, he says he loves Joe Biden. Here we go. I love Joe Biden. I consider him a friend. So they're close. He isn't just a fundraiser. He knows Joe Biden well. And he goes on to write here, we are not going to win in November with this president. We won't win the House, and we're going to lose the Senate. This is the opinion of every senator and congress member and governor that I've spoken with in private. Every single one, irrespective of what he or she is saying publicly. This also, I think, helps to sort of give the green light to some of these individuals to maybe come forward. And I'm going to share a bit of that in a second here, where somebody was called out for saying something privately and has now acknowledged what he said publicly. So I'll get to who that Democratic senator is in a minute here. But he goes on to write, the dam has broken. We can put our heads in the sand and pray for a miracle in November, or we can speak the truth. Looking at all of the data that we have all seen, and I'm going to reference in a second here as well, from CNN, the comparison where Biden was sitting at in polling in 2020 compared to where he's sitting now, and ultimately what happened in 2020 and how off the polling was, how it overestimated Joe Biden's support. He goes on to write, so here are some options that at least he's floating. Wes Moore, Kamala Harris, Gretchen Whitmer, Gavin Newsom, Andy Bashir, and J.B. Pritzker. I've said in a video last week about this, where according to FEC guidelines, only Kamala Harris can legally receive the fundraising money that the Biden campaign has already raised, unless they want to go through a PAC. But then there's issues with that in terms of the campaign would no longer be able to communicate with how the PAC uses that money. And the ad rates for PACs are higher than the ad rates for campaigns. So basically, there are all these barriers if the candidate that replaces Biden is not Kamala Harris. But because Kamala Harris is the VP and is already on the ticket for president, she's the one that can easily receive that fundraising money. He was on to write, we could go into a Democratic convention next month and figure it out, which, again, that's better than having Biden on the ticket. But I just think it makes the most sense to have Kamala Harris there based on how the process works. But he goes on to finish here. This can be an exciting time for democracy, as we've just seen with 200 or so French candidates who stepped aside and put their personal ambitions on hold to save their democracy from the far right. I covered this in my video on the French elections, where you had the expectation in France was that the far right was going to win based on how the first round of voting went. And then the center and the left coalesced and dropped out in some races to essentially give whoever was more likely to win that race the upper hand in order to defeat the far right. Now, it's different, of course, the way the system works in the US. It is not a parliamentary system. There isn't multiple rounds of voting. But essentially, the same philosophy here of working together to ensure that the far right in Donald Trump and the GOP do not win. He goes on to end saying Joe Biden is a hero. Again, this is sort of speaking to Joe Biden here. He's a hero, saved democracy in 2020. We need him to do it again in 2024 by, of course, not resigning, but stepping aside in the candidacy. Now, I'll play a bit of this. So this is from Harry Enton here from CNN. Biden is saying that 2020 polls underestimated him. So why believe them now? When it comes to the general election, that's not true. Polls overestimated him.
I just want to point out where the polls are now, where they were at this point back in 2020, and Joe Biden's worst position in the polls back in 2020. Right now, Donald Trump leads in an aggregate of national polls by about 3 percentage points. If you go back 4 years ago at this point, Joe Biden was ahead by 9 points. This right now don't look anything like what we saw 4 years ago at this point. I then decided to take it a step further. What was Biden's worst 2020 polling position? He was ahead by 4 points, which basically matched what he ended up beating Donald Trump by in the national popular vote. So this 3-point advantage for Donald Trump is Donald Trump's best position versus Joe Biden, whether you include the polls this year or you include the polls last cycle. The idea that the polls underestimated Joe Biden last time around, simply put, does not hold any water. Who led in early July polls? Well, right now, Donald Trump is ahead. Go back in 2020, a Democrat, Biden. 2016, Hillary Clinton, a Democrat. 2008, 2012, a Democrat. Even in 2004, where George W. Bush ended up winning, John Kerry was actually ahead in the polls at this point. You have to go all the way back to 2000, to George W. Bush being ahead in the early July polls. You have to go all the way back to the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century, to find a Republican ahead at this point. 24 years. At this particular point, the idea that a Democrat is ahead, there are voters in the electorate who are dealing with a poll position they have never seen before, and that is a Republican leading in the national popular vote, at least according to the polls.
A very unusual situation.
So understand, this is what these people are looking at, whether it's fundraisers like George Clooney or Democratic politicians or Democratic strategists. They are looking at the math. They're seeing where Joe Biden was in 2020 and seeing where he is now and seeing where he has been consistently during this race against Donald Trump and realizing that Democrats are going to get destroyed if Joe Biden is at the top of the ticket. This may go to why there wasn't as much of this worry before the debate, or I should say before the primary, because there was sort of this idea that, oh, it's okay, it's all going to work out. You know, lots of time, Biden can turn this around. And once that debate happened, it was really sort of the real start of the campaign in realizing, oh, wait, this guy simply does not have the ability to turn this campaign around. I'm going to share a few clips here from various Democratic politicians either this morning or last night, coming out to discuss this. Let's start with Nancy Pelosi, who was on Morning Joe, and look at how she answers this question.
He have your support to be the head of the Democratic ticket?
As long as the president it's up to the president to decide if he is going to run. We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short. I think overwhelming support of the caucus. It's not for me to say. I'm not the head of the caucus anymore, but he's beloved. He is respected, and people want him to make that decision, not me.
He has said he has made the decision. He has said firmly this week he is going to run. Do you want him to run?
I want him to do whatever he decides to do, and that's the way it is. Whatever he decides, we go with.
Does he have your?
I mean, Biden has said several times now, I am running. I am the candidate. Like, since the debate, he has said this. And Nancy Pelosi is pretending he still has a decision to make. Or I shouldn't say pretending. She is saying that he still has a decision to make, meaning that there is this continued pressure, and they are essentially waiting on him to decide not to run because they've heard the decision already and are unwilling to accept what his decision so far has been. Meaning there is this debate is still going on internally. Here is this guy that was exposed with the truth. So Michael Bennett was so you'll see in this clip, but he apparently said behind the scenes that Biden cannot win, and now he's saying it publicly.
My colleague Dana Bash reported that you, Senator John Tester, and Senator Sherrod Brown all said during that lunch that you don't think President Biden can win in 2024. Is that true?
Well, it's true that I said that, and I did say that behind closed doors, and you guys and others asked whether I had said it, and that is what I said. So I figured I should come here and say it publicly.
Why do you think he can't win in November?
I just think this race is on a trajectory that is very worrisome if you care about the future of this country. Joe Biden was 9 points up at this time. The last time he was running, Hillary Clinton was 5 points up. This is the first time in more than 20 years that a Republican president has been up in this part of the campaign. Donald Trump is on track, I think, to win this election and maybe win it by a landslide and take with him the Senate and the House. And so for me, this isn't a question about polling. It's not a question about politics. It's a moral question about the future of our country. And I think it's critically important for us to come to grips with what we face if together we put this country on the path of electing Donald Trump again.
I mean, he says it's not about polling. It kind of is about polling because if Biden was ahead of Trump by like 20 points, we wouldn't be having these discussions. But he's not. The math shows Biden is going to lose, clearly. That is why these discussions are now going on. Last one here. This is Senator Blumenthal. I am deeply concerned about President Biden.
I am deeply concerned about Joe Biden winning this November because it is an existential threat to the country if Donald Trump wins. So I think that we have to reach a conclusion as soon as possible. And I think Joe Biden, as the Democratic nominee, has my support.
Brian, give me your reaction. And how are they going to ultimately reach that conclusion he discusses?
Yeah, what's remarkable about what Senator Blumenthal had to say there is that he supports Joe Biden. He's never wavered. He's been someone who, right after the debate, even said that he was still believing that he should be the nominee. So the idea that in the same breath that he says he supports Joe Biden as the nominee, that he also says he has real concerns that Donald Trump could win in the fall, it shows this kind of murky position that congressional Democrats are leaving the president in, and why there is this necessity, as he rightly points out, for them to figure something out and do it sooner rather than later.
I think this goes to the understanding why a lot of these politicians are unwilling to be clear about them clearly wanting Biden not to be the candidate. I think they're afraid of who Biden is as somebody who has an ego. They may think, and they may think this correctly because they know him, that if they're very forceful in trying to push him out, that Biden will simply take that as a power move and that he's not going to back down to other people trying to, one-up him, that he will simply fight back and double down. Whereas if they, again, this is what they're believing. I'm not even sure if this is true, but they're thinking that, if we do this privately and try to push him along privately, that we have a better shot at him actually making this decision himself. Or essentially waiting for someone like George Clooney, who clearly this isn't a power move for him. George Clooney is not a Democratic politician, but it's just a donor who is worried about the future of the party. It's more likely, I think, that Biden would listen to someone like that as opposed to listening to another senator who Biden may take as, again, someone trying to take his power. So this whole debate gets into egos and how politicians operate on a level mentally that others simply do not. Like, it's unfortunate. Politics should really be about public service. Like, that's what it is about, or at least should be about. But a lot of people, especially when it comes to national politics, it's about ego. It's about camera time. It's about power. So knowing all of those elements are at play, these Democrats are being a lot more careful with how they treat this. But since this George Clooney thing has come out, I really think this, out of anything so far since the debate, this is going to move the needle the most. But still, ultimately, it's up to Joe Biden to make that decision.